Chapter 1. The Ominous Arrival. The dense crimson fog rolled in with an eerie silence, swallowing the landscape inch by inch. Adam Carter tightened his coat around his shoulders as he stepped off the train, his boots crunching against the damp gravel of the deserted station platform. The air carried an unnatural chill, one that gnawed at his skin despite the warmth of his woolen attire. The town of Ravensbrook lay beyond the mist, its buildings barely visible through the thick red haze. A single street lamp flickered weakly, casting distorted shadows along the cobblestone path leading into the heart of town. Something felt wrong, deeply, profoundly wrong. There were no voices, no distant hum of life, only the suffocating silence of the fog creeping through the streets. Adam glanced at the train behind him. The conductor, a frail old man with hollow eyes, tipped his hat before retreating into the locomotive. The train let out a mournful whistle, its wheels groaning as it disappeared into the distance, vanishing into the mist as if it had never been there at all. Adam was alone. A rustling sound made him turn sharply. A silhouette stood near the station's exit, barely visible through the thick fog. "Hello?" Adam called, his voice muffled by the dense air. The figure remained still, its form wavering like a mirage. His pulse quickened. Something about it was unnatural. Its outline too still, its presence too heavy. Summoning his courage, Adam stepped forward, but the figure dissipated into the fog as if it had never existed. The silence grew heavier, pressing against his ears, making the hair on the back of his neck stand up. He exhaled shakily and pressed onward, following the dimly lit path into the town. As he walked, shapes emerged from the fog, twisted storefronts, abandoned homes, windows dark and lifeless. The town looked untouched by time, frozen in an unnatural stillness. Signs creaked as the wind whispered through the empty streets. Adam caught sight of a newspaper stand, its old, yellowed pages fluttering weakly. He stepped closer, brushing off the thick layer of dust. The date sent a chill down his spine. October 13, 1897. His heart pounded. That was impossible. The ink was fresh, the pages crisp, as if printed just yesterday. Adam clenched his jaw, willing himself to stay rational. This had to be some kind of elaborate hoax. But as he turned away, the whispers started. Faint, distant yet unmistakable, the town was not as empty as it seemed. Chapter 2. Whispers in the Mist. Adam's footsteps echoed eerily against the cobblestone as he wandered deeper into the fog-laden streets of Ravensbrook. The town was deathly silent, yet the feeling of being watched clawed at the back of his mind. Every few steps he would pause, ears straining, but all he heard was the whisper of the wind weaving through the empty alleys. Then the whispers changed. They were no longer just the wind. The sound became distinct. Soft, hurried voices, rising and falling as if conversing in hushed tones. Adam turned sharply, eyes scanning the fog, but nothing stirred. The voices continued, their source unknowable, weaving through the thick red mist. He moved toward the sound, each step careful, deliberate. As he passed a boarded-up general store, something caught his eye. A faint flicker of movement in the fog. a shadow darting between buildings. He quickened his pace, rounding a corner, but the street was empty. Only the whispers remained, swirling around him like unseen phantoms. Then, just ahead, he saw it. A figure stood motionless in the center of the road. Cloaked in tattered garments, its face obscured by the mist, it did not move, did not breathe. Adam's fingers curled into fists as he took a cautious step forward. "Who's there?" His voice broke the stillness. The whispers stopped. A pregnant silence followed, heavy with expectation. Then the figure tilted its head ever so slightly, as if acknowledging his presence. Adam swallowed hard, his throat dry. He stepped closer, the fog shifting around him, and as he neared, the figure's face came into view. There was nothing, a hollow void where its features should have been, an empty blackness that seemed to devour the light. Adam stumbled back, his breath hitching in his throat. The figure did not move, did not react. It simply remained, an unearthly presence in the unnatural fog. Then, without warning, it spoke. A voice fractured and distant, as if carried through time itself. "Leave, before the fog takes you too." Before Adam could react, the figure dissolved into the mist, leaving only the echo of its warning lingering in the air. Chapter 3. The Vanishing Townsfolk. Adam stood frozen, his breath shallow as the last echo of the mysterious figure's warning faded into the crimson mist. The town of Ravensbrook, despite its eerie silence, was not abandoned. Something, or someone, still remained. Determined to uncover the truth, Adam pressed forward through the heavy fog, his every step muffled by the dense air. Storefronts loomed on either side of the street, their windows empty, their doors hanging slightly ajar as if abandoned in haste. The deeper he walked, the stronger his unease grew. Then he heard it. A faint shuffling sound, distant yet distinct. He turned sharply, scanning the mist, but the streets remained desolate. The sound came again, closer this time, accompanied by the soft scrape of feet against stone. Adam's pulse quickened as he followed the noise, leading him to a small, dimly lit alleyway between two buildings. A shadow flickered in the distance. "Hello?" he called, his voice barely a whisper against the fog. A rustling sound, then silence. Adam inched forward, his fingers curling around the edge of the nearest building for support. His boots scraped against the uneven cobblestone as he peered deeper into the alley. A discarded lantern flickered weakly near a crumbling doorstep, its flame barely holding against the damp air. Then something moved. A hunched figure emerged from the shadows, its form cloaked in a tattered shawl. Adam's breath caught in his throat. It was an old woman, her face hollowed and pale, her eyes wide with terror. Her frail hands clutched at the fabric around her shoulders as she stumbled toward him. "You should not be here," she rasped, her voice barely more than a whisper. "The others, they're gone. The fog, it took them." Adam knelt beside her, steadying her shaking frame. "Who took them? What's happening here?" She shook her head violently. "No time. You must hide before they see you, before you vanish too." Before he could ask another question, a shrill, piercing sound ripped through the air, a wailing cry that sent a violent shudder through his bones. The woman's breath hitched, her fingers digging into his arm. Her wide, haunted eyes flickered toward the mist behind him. Adam turned slowly, every muscle in his body tensing as the crimson fog thickened. Shapes began to emerge from the haze. Elongated figures with hollow, gaping faces, moving in a slow, unnatural procession. The old woman let out a strangled sob, and then she was gone. One moment she was there, clinging to him with desperation, and the next, she simply faded into the fog, her form unraveling like smoke in the wind. Adam stumbled back, his breath catching in his throat. He reached out, but there was nothing. No trace of her existence, no sign that she had ever been there at all. The figures in the mist grew closer. Adam turned on his heel and ran. Chapter 4: Secrets Beneath the Church. The towering spire of Ravensbrook's church loomed through the crimson fog, its once pristine stone facade cracked and worn with age. Adam hesitated at the entrance, his fingers brushing against the heavy wooden door. It was ice cold, despite the damp chill that surrounded the town. Something about the church unsettled him. It was too quiet, too still, as if it had been untouched for centuries. Taking a deep breath, he pushed the door open. A low creak echoed through the empty nave as he stepped inside. The interior was dim, lit only by the flickering remnants of long, burned-out candles. Dust hung in the air, disturbed by his movement. Pews stood in neat rows, but their surfaces were cracked, their cushions torn apart as though something had clawed at them. At the far end, the altar stood untouched, but beneath it the stone floor was different. Darker, uneven. Adam's eyes narrowed. It looked as if something had been moved, disturbed. He stepped closer, heart pounding. His breath caught when he noticed it. A trap door, partially concealed beneath a rotting rug. Swallowing his fear, Adam knelt and brushed the fabric aside, revealing rusted iron handles. He hesitated, but something inside him, curiosity, or perhaps the need to understand what was happening in this cursed town, compelled him to pull the door open. The scent of damp earth and decay rose from the depths below. A narrow staircase, barely wide enough for one person, spiraled downward into the unknown. Adam retrieved his lantern from his coat, its weak flame casting trembling shadows against the walls as he descended. The air grew colder, heavier, each step echoing unnaturally in the narrow space. At the bottom, the passage opened into a crypt-like chamber. The walls were lined with carvings, symbols he didn't recognize, etched into the stone in deep, erratic patterns. At the center of the room stood an altar, similar to the one above but far older, its surface stained dark with something he dared not identify. Then he saw them, figures, barely visible in the dim light, standing in the farthest corners of the chamber, their bodies draped in heavy robes, their faces hidden beneath deep hoods. They did not move, did not acknowledge his presence, yet Adam knew they were aware of him. A voice, low, rasping, cut through the silence. "You should not have come." The candlelight flickered violently as the figures shifted, stepping forward in unison. Adam's breath hitched as the walls around him seemed to close in, the air thickening with an overwhelming force. His instincts screamed at him to run, but his legs felt rooted in place. Then, from the darkness behind him, another voice whispered, "They are already watching." Chapter 5. The Blood Moon Prophecy. The flickering candlelight barely illuminated the stone walls of the hidden chamber beneath the church. Adam's breath came in short, ragged gasps as he stared at the cloaked figures before him. They stood in eerie silence, their faces obscured by the deep shadows cast by their hoods. The only sound in the crypt was the soft drip of water from the ceiling, a rhythmic echo that seemed to mark the passage of time. One of the figures stepped forward, its movements slow and deliberate. Adam stiffened as the air thickened, his instincts screaming at him to flee. But something held him in place. Some unseen force pressing down on him like an invisible weight. "The blood moon is near," the figure intoned, its voice hollow like the whisper of a forgotten memory. "And with it, the final offering must be made." Adam swallowed hard. "Offering? What are you talking about?" The figure raised a skeletal hand, pointing toward the altar. Adam's gaze followed, and his stomach clenched at the sight before him. Carved into the stone was a massive symbol, its design intricate and disturbing, a crescent moon encircling a single open eye. Dried blood filled the grooves, evidence of past rituals. Another figure stepped forward, holding an ancient tome bound in cracked leather. The book's cover bore the same symbol as the altar. The robed figure opened it, revealing yellowed pages filled with strange markings and ominous illustrations. The words were in an ancient language Adam couldn't understand, but the images spoke for themselves. Sacrificial rituals, dark ceremonies beneath a blood-red moon, and the transformation of human forms into something grotesque and unnatural. "The town is bound to the prophecy," the first figure continued. "When the blood moon rises, the debt must be paid." Adam clenched his fists. "Debt? What debt? Who do you think you are, deciding the fate of this town?" The hooded figures did not move, did not react. Instead, the one holding the tome turned a page, revealing an illustration that sent a chill down Adam's spine. It was a drawing of himself, his own face, etched in ink centuries before he was even born, his own eyes staring back at him in frozen horror. Beneath the image, one word stood out among the ancient script: sacrifice. Adam stumbled backward, his breath ragged. "No, that's not possible." "It is fate," the figure whispered. "You are the key, Adam Carter. You are the final offering." The walls of the chamber seemed to close in as the figures advanced. The candlelight flickered violently, casting erratic shadows that danced like phantoms. The whispering voices grew louder, overlapping into an indecipherable chant. The symbols on the walls pulsed with an unnatural glow, as if awakening after centuries of dormancy. Then, from above, a deep, resonant sound filled the air. The church bells. Their chime was unlike any Adam had ever heard, slow, haunting, reverberating through the stone like an ancient heartbeat. The robed figures stopped, their heads tilting toward the ceiling as if listening. The blood moon was rising. Adam had to get out. Summoning every ounce of strength, he turned and bolted toward the stairs, his legs burning as he sprinted up the winding passageway. The chanting grew louder behind him, the shadows stretching, reaching for him. He burst through the trapdoor, stumbling onto the cold stone floor of the church. The world outside had changed. The fog had thickened into a suffocating crimson veil, the sky above painted in hues of deep red. The moon, massive and looming, bathed the town in its eerie glow. And standing in the middle of the church aisle, waiting for him, was the same faceless figure from the fog. It is time. Chapter 6. Shadows in the Fog. Adam's heart pounded as he stumbled out of the church, his breath fogging in the frigid air. The blood moon's eerie glow bathed Ravensbrook in a crimson haze, distorting the already nightmarish townscape. The fog thickened, shifting unnaturally as if it were alive, swallowing the buildings one by one. The faceless figure in the church had uttered those chilling words. It is time. Time for what? Adam had no intention of finding out. He turned sharply and sprinted down the cobblestone path, his footsteps barely making a sound against the oppressive quiet. The silence was suffocating, unnatural, as though the town itself was holding its breath. But Adam knew he wasn't alone. Shadows flickered at the edge of his vision, shifting within the fog, watching. Then the whispers returned. Unlike before, they weren't distant. They were here, right beside him, around him, inside him. Adam gritted his teeth, pushing forward, but the fog clung to him like invisible hands, dragging at his limbs, slowing his escape. From the corner of his eye, he saw movement. He turned his head, and his blood ran cold. Figures half-formed and writhing in the mist stretched toward him with elongated arms, their faces contorted in silent screams. They moved with unnatural grace, their forms dissolving and reforming within the crimson fog. One reached out, fingers brushing his coat, and an unbearable chill shot through his body. He gasped, staggering backward, but they were everywhere, surrounding him like ghosts from another world. Run! The word slithered through the fog, spoken in a dozen overlapping voices. Adam didn't need to be told twice. He broke into a desperate sprint, weaving through the empty streets, the world around him warping and shifting with every step. The fog twisted unnaturally, forming shapes. Figures from his past, from his nightmares, from memories he didn't even recognize. Faces of people he had never met, all whispering in unison. He reached the town square, gasping for breath. The old fountain in the center, once dry and forgotten, now gushed with thick, dark liquid that reflected the moon's blood-red glow. The mist curled around its edges, pulsating like a living thing. Then the bells began to toll. Adam clapped his hands over his ears, the sound reverberating through his skull. The robed figures from the crypt stepped out of the fog, forming a silent circle around him. Their presence felt suffocating, as if the very air had turned against him. The sacrifice must be completed, one of them intoned. Adam's knees nearly buckled. I am not your sacrifice. The figures did not move, but the fog did. It coiled around his ankles, snaking up his legs like grasping fingers, pulling him toward the fountain. The dark liquid inside churned violently, reflecting images that didn't belong. glimpses of something vast and ancient, something watching from beyond the veil of reality. A shadow loomed behind Adam. He turned, heart hammering, and came face to face with the faceless figure once more. "It is time," it whispered again, and the fog swallowed him whole. Chapter 7. The Forgotten Sacrifice. Adam's vision swam as the fog engulfed him, its crimson tendrils tightening like a noose. The last thing he remembered was the faceless figure whispering those chilling words. "It is time." And now he was somewhere else, somewhere cold, somewhere ancient. He awoke on a stone altar, his wrists and ankles bound by thick, weathered ropes. The air smelled of damp earth and something metallic. Something he realized with horror was blood. Shadows flickered along the walls, their forms cast by dozens of torches lining the cavernous space. The sound of distant chanting echoed through the chamber, a monotonous hymn of dread. A massive stone carving loomed above him, a grotesque figure, half human, half beast, with hollow eyes that seemed to bore into his soul. The same symbol from the crypt, the crescent moon encircling a single open eye, was etched into the altar beneath him, its grooves filled with something dark and glistening. Adam struggled against his restraints, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Panic clawed at his chest. Where was he? How had he been brought here? He forced himself to steady his breathing, scanning the space. Figures in dark robes encircled the altar, their faces hidden beneath heavy hoods. But unlike before, they were not merely standing in silent observation. They were preparing for something. One of the robed figures stepped forward, holding an ornate dagger with an obsidian blade. Its curved edge gleamed under the torchlight, its surface engraved with the same ancient symbols that adorned the cavern walls. Adam's pulse thundered as the figure lifted the dagger high, the chanting growing frenzied. "With this blood, the pact is renewed," the figure intoned. "The sacrifice must be made." Adam thrashed against the ropes, his mind screaming for escape. "No, you have the wrong person." The robed figure hesitated, only for a fraction of a second. Then, a whisper passed through the chamber like a gust of wind, curling through the air with ethereal presence. "Does not belong." The chanting faltered. The figures stiffened, heads turning toward the source of the voice. Adam craned his neck, searching for whoever or whatever had spoken. And then he saw her. A woman stood at the far end of the chamber, her silhouette illuminated by the torches. Her long, silver hair cascaded down her back, and her eyes, filled with sorrow and wisdom beyond measure, locked onto Adam's. "Release him," she commanded, her voice both gentle and unyielding. The robed figures did not move. The one holding the dagger took a step toward her. "The prophecy demands blood. The cycle cannot be broken." The woman raised a pale hand. "The cycle was broken long ago. You are all prisoners of a forgotten oath. Let him go." For the first time since arriving in Ravensbrook, Adam saw hesitation in the cultists. Doubt rippled through them like a wave. The woman took another step forward, her presence unwavering. "You are bound to a past you do not remember," she said. Your ancestors made a choice in desperation, but he is not part of that choice. Let him go, and perhaps you can find peace." A murmur spread among the figures. The robed figure holding the dagger hesitated. Then, without warning, one of them lunged forward, knife in hand. Adam braced himself, but the woman moved faster. She lifted her hands and the torches flared, their flames stretching toward the ceiling. The cavern trembled. The attacking figure was thrown backward, crashing against the stone wall. A gust of wind howled through the chamber, sending the crimson fog swirling like a living thing. The bindings around Adam's wrists and ankles unraveled on their own, freeing him. "Run!" the woman whispered. Adam didn't hesitate. He leapt from the altar, his legs weak but his determination stronger than ever. The cavern shook violently, stones crumbling from above as the ritual chamber began to collapse. The cultists scrambled in confusion, their chants now screams of fear. The woman reached for Adam's hand, guiding him toward an archway that had been hidden behind the altar. "This way!" As they ran, Adam stole one last glance over his shoulder. The faceless figure had appeared once more, standing amidst the crumbling ruin, watching. But this time, it did not chase him. It only whispered, "The past never forgets. The fog will return." Chapter 8. The Cursed Bell Tower. The bell tower loomed above Ravensbrook like a silent guardian, its jagged silhouette piercing through the crimson fog. Adam and the silver-haired woman, Evelyn, stood at its base, gazing up at its eerie structure. The tower had long been abandoned, its bell rusted and lifeless, yet a strange energy pulsed from within its stone walls. "This place?" Evelyn whispered, her fingers brushing against the ancient stone. "It holds the final key." Adam swallowed hard. The town had been a nightmare of shifting shadows and whispered warnings, yet something about the tower felt different. It wasn't just haunted, it was waiting. With a nod, he stepped forward, gripping the rusted iron door handle. It groaned in protest as it swung open, revealing a narrow staircase winding upward into darkness. The air inside was thick with dust, the scent of decay and forgotten time pressing against his senses. As they ascended, the wooden steps creaked beneath their weight. The further they climbed, the heavier the air became, as though the tower itself resisted their presence. Shadows danced along the walls, flickering unnaturally in the dim light filtering through the stained glass windows. Then the whispers returned. Unlike the fog's disembodied voices, these whispers carried form, a chorus of hushed, desperate cries that filled the stairwell. Adam's grip tightened on the banister as he exchanged a glance with Evelyn. "The spirits here are trapped," she murmured, "bound to the tower." They reached a landing where the wooden floor was warped and splintered. An ancient rope frayed from centuries of neglect hung from the ceiling, connected to the bell high above. The rusted clapper swayed slightly, though there was no wind. Adam reached out but froze as a cold breeze brushed past him. The air shifted, and a figure materialized near the bell. It was barely human, a withered form draped in tattered robes, its face obscured by a hood. hollow, glowing eyes burned beneath the shadow of the cowl. "Demon, have you come?" the entity rasped, its voice layered with countless others. "The toll has not been paid." Adam took a cautious step forward. "We're here to end this, to break the curse." The figure let out a slow, rattling breath. "You cannot break what is woven into time. The toll must be paid." Evelyn stepped beside Adam. "There must be another way. The town cannot remain in this nightmare forever." The entity's head tilted slightly. "The bell binds the fog. The fog binds the souls. If the bell rings once more, the past will reclaim its dead." Adam's gaze lifted to the enormous rusted bell above them. He could feel its weight, not just in mass but in power. It was the heart of the curse, the tether between the living and the dead. "If we ring it," Adam asked slowly, "what happens?" The entity's glowing eyes burned brighter. "The lost will be freed, but the bell demands balance. One must remain." Adam's stomach turned. "A sacrifice." Evelyn's breath hitched, and silence stretched between them. The entity did not answer. It simply waited. Adam's mind raced. The town, the fog, the whispers, everything tied to this one moment. If the bell rang, the souls would be released. But at what cost? Could he leave Ravensbrook, knowing another would be bound in his place? The bell pulsed, as though sensing his indecision. Adam took a deep breath and reached for the rope. The tower trembled as the first chime echoed through the town. Chapter 9. The Final Descent. The moment Adam pulled the rope, the sound of the bell resonated through Ravensbrook with an unnatural force. The fog twisted violently, as if writhing in agony, its tendrils retreating from the town square like a wounded beast. The very ground beneath Adam trembled, ancient stone shifting underfoot as deep guttural echoes reverberated through the bell tower. Evelyn gasped, gripping the banister as dust and debris rained down from above. "Something is happening. Something beyond our control." Adam barely had time to respond before the bell let out another deafening chime. The stained glass windows shattered, shards of crimson and gold scattering like dying embers. A pulse of energy erupted from the tower, sending both Adam and Evelyn to their knees. The whispers in the fog turned to wails. Agonized, desperate cries of souls long lost. "They are being freed," Evelyn whispered, looking toward the dissolving mist. But something else was emerging. A dark figure, more solid than the faceless shadows Adam had encountered before, formed at the base of the bell. It was not like the others. This one radiated power, its eyes like burning coals within the void of its hood. The specter raised an elongated skeletal hand and pointed directly at Adam. "You have broken the veil," it intoned, its voice the sound of cracking stone. "But you cannot undo the past without a price." Adam struggled to his feet, his mind racing. "I was told the lost would be freed. I was told this would end the curse." The figure's gaze never wavered. "You were misled. The bell does not free, it exchanges. One must always take the place of those who leave." Evelyn's eyes widened with horror. "No, it can't be." The figure extended its arms, and the remaining fog began to coil around Adam, tightening like chains. He gasped, struggling against the invisible force pulling him toward the darkness forming beneath the bell. Shadows clawed at his limbs, cold as the grave, whispering in voices both familiar and foreign. "Adam!" Evelyn cried, lunging forward, but she too was repelled by the supernatural force. "There has to be another way." The figure's voice grew softer, almost reverent. "Only one can remain. One must be bound so the others may go." Adam felt his body weakening, the town fading from his vision. His mind was flooded with memories not his own. Centuries of trapped souls, reliving the same torment, bound to the fog, unable to move on. He saw the first sacrifice, the original keeper of the bell, bound by the same cruel fate. And then he understood. With a final desperate breath, Adam clenched his fists and pushed back against the force, dragging him into the void. "Not this time!" He turned, grabbing the ancient bell rope once more. With every ounce of strength he had left, he pulled it again. The bell tolled louder than ever, shaking the very foundations of the tower. A brilliant light burst from within its core, flooding the space with golden radiance. The figure let out a deafening shriek as the light engulfed it, its form unraveling into threads of darkness. The fog let out a final mournful wail before vanishing completely, leaving only the silent ruins of Ravensbrook beneath the moonlight. Adam collapsed to his knees, gasping for breath. Evelyn rushed to his side, helping him up as the last remnants of the supernatural energy dissipated. The town was silent, truly silent, for the first time in centuries. The curse was broken, but not without cost. A deep crack had formed in the bell, its once powerful chime now silenced forever. The spirits had been freed, but Ravensbrook would never be the same. Adam and Evelyn exchanged a look, one of relief and of sorrow. "Let's leave this place," Evelyn murmured, "before it finds another way to pull us back." Adam nodded, and together they stepped into the dawn, leaving the haunted echoes of Ravensbrook behind them. The past was finally at rest, or so they hoped. Chapter 10, Escape or Doom. The air inside the bell tower was thick with the scent of dust and ancient stone, but outside, Ravensbrook had fallen silent. The crimson fog had dissipated, revealing the ruins of the town beneath the eerie glow of the blood moon. Adam stood at the edge of the tower, Evelyn by his side, both gazing down at the landscape that had once been consumed by darkness. But it was not over yet. A deep tremor ran through the ground, and Adam felt it beneath his boots. The cobblestone streets cracked and the buildings groaned as though the town itself was resisting its release. A strange hum filled the air, growing louder, vibrating through the bell tower walls. It was as if something was awakening beneath Ravensbrook. Evelyn's breath hitched. "We broke the curse, but something else. It's still here." Adam turned to her, urgency rising in his chest. "We need to get out of here, now." They rushed down the spiral staircase of the tower, each step sending echoes through the hollow structure. The closer they got to the exit, the more intense the tremors became. When they finally reached the wooden doors, Adam shoved them open, only to be met with a sight that froze his blood. The fog had returned, not as a creeping mist, but as a swirling vortex at the heart of the town square. The shadows, once aimless whispers in the dark, now had form. Towering, faceless specters emerging from the swirling mass. Their elongated fingers stretched toward the tower, toward Adam and Evelyn, their silent wails cutting through the night. "Run!" Evelyn screamed, gripping Adam's hand. They sprinted through the collapsing town, dodging falling debris as the very foundations of Ravensbrook crumbled around them. The ghosts of the past, freed from their prison, now roamed the ruins, watching in silence. Some faded into nothingness. Others remained, aimless and wandering. But the vortex grew stronger, as if pulling everything light, air, even time itself, into its dark abyss. Had the old railway station emerged from the mist, the same station Adam had arrived at what felt like a lifetime ago. But there was no train, no escape route, only an endless abyss where the tracks should have been. "It's closing around us," Evelyn cried, her voice nearly lost in the roar of the vortex. "There has to be a way out." Adam's eyes darted across the station. The old conductor's booth still stood, the lantern inside flickering, and then he saw it. A lever on the rusted control panel. A track switch. If the train had ever been meant to leave this town, that lever would open the way. "Stay close," he shouted, racing toward the booth. The ground beneath them cracked, splitting the station in two. Evelyn barely managed to leap across the gap, grasping Adam's hand as he pulled her inside the booth. The vortex was closing in, the air thick with ghostly wails. With one last desperate motion, Adam grabbed the rusted lever and yanked it down. A deep, mechanical groan filled the air. Then, from the darkness beyond the vortex, the distant chime of a train whistle. The very same train Adam had arrived on. But this time it was different. Its form shimmered between reality and memory, its headlights burning through the fog like an otherworldly beacon. The wheels screeched against the rails as it slowed to a stop before them, the doors creaking open as if inviting them aboard. Evelyn turned to Adam, hesitation flickering in her eyes. "Do we trust it?" Adam stared at the train, then back at the swirling abyss devouring Ravensbrook. "I think it's our only choice." Hand in hand, they ran toward the waiting train, the wind howling around them. Just as they stepped onto the platform, the ground beneath them gave way, the last remnants of Ravensbrook being consumed by the void. With one final leap, they hurled themselves onto the train. The doors slammed shut behind them. The train jolted forward, its wheels rattling against the tracks. Adam and Evelyn collapsed onto the seats, gasping for breath. Outside the windows, the world they had left behind folded in on itself, the last remnants of Ravensbrook vanishing into nothingness. The fog, the spirits, the curse, all swallowed by the abyss. Then, silence. The train rumbled steadily forward through the dark countryside, as if none of it had ever happened. Evelyn turned to Adam, her voice barely above a whisper. "Did we escape?" Adam's fingers tightened around hers. "I don't know. But we're still here. That has to mean something." As the train carried them away from the nightmare of Ravensbrook, the blood moon slowly faded from the sky. And for the first time in what felt like eternity, the sun began to rise. They had survived. But as Adam glanced at his reflection in the train window, a cold chill ran through him. For just a moment, his face did not look like his own, and somewhere in the distance the sound of a bell tolled once more.